Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Brkan. I'm a senior advisor at the Alliance of Democracies Foundation and to the Transatlantic Commission on Election Integrity. Uh, Thanks for tuning in. This is the live show. So we have 3 breakout sessions right now, but this is the one which will be broadcast on all our channels. So thank you very much for picking this one. Also, thank you very much to our cooperation partners, namely the institutions of NDI, IRI, the EED and the Bush Center for supporting our efforts to jointly defend democracy across the world. Just a very short housekeeping announcement. At a later stage, we will give you the option to ask questions to the panel. And if you want to do so, please start immediately putting your questions either in the comment section of the various social media channels or use the Q&A chat in the virtual conference room. And without much further ado, I give the floor to our excellent moderator, Tanit Koch, who is a professional journalist from Germany. She's the managing director of the German news TV channel NTV, and she's the editor-in-chief of RTL Newsroom, and we couldn't be in better hands. So again, thanks you for tuning in, and the floor is yours, Tanit.
Thanks, Olaf. Thanks for the praise. I hope I'll be up for that. No pressure after that introduction. It's great to have you all. It will be even greater to meet in person in Copenhagen. But I'm sure there'll be a time between COVID-19 and COVID-20 when we can all do so. Thank you so much for sharing and joining this panel through a zillion time zones. I think we can all agree that the right to vote and to be elected and to hold free and fair elections is one of the absolute essentials in any democracy, but the protection of human lives for any political decision maker has to probably rank equal. So the practical question in a pandemic, let it be, as said, COVID-19, COVID-20, or whichever virus comes next, is quite practically, how do we host elections in a pandemic and what specific threats are there that must be tackled? And as that's my personal view, I think we often have a rather self-centered view in sort of Center Europe and the US when it comes to global questions. I'm very glad that at the Copenhagen Democracy Summit, we have a diverse group of participants here in this breakout session. So for everybody watching and listening, let me just quickly introduce our panel in alphabetical order. So there's Luis Assardo, who's a Guatemalan journalist and the founder of Confirmado, a project that seeks to combat disinformation. There is Mr. Darko Brkan. He's a social activist. He's director of Zasto. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing this correctly, which means why not? And is a Sarajevo-based NGO that promotes civic activism, governmental accountability, and democracy in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We also introduce Mrs. Nanmo Sandi Lwin. Forgive my appalling, I tried, but I just failed. She's senior program officer at the International Foundation for Electoral Systems in Myanmar, and she concentrates on local capacity building, trainings, and civil society programs around democratic goals, among many other tasks. And last but not least is Mr. Hsuan, who I will call Ttcat, which is his nickname, and you might explain to us what he is and where it came from. He's the co-founder and CEO of Doublethink Lab, an organization that researches modern threats to democracy and counter strategies against these threats. Ttcat focuses on mapping China's online information operation, may also say disinformation operation maybe, in Taiwan. So thank you all for joining this panel. And question, I think, is not so much for us one year, but why aren't there any even more panels like this? Presentations, it'll be more conversation. Whenever you have something you share, and I'm not looking there yet, you already think I might overlook you to raise your hand, and I'll try to fit in. So we will talk about democracy elections and the pandemic and what we can learn from this. So let's start with Myanmar, because the latest election, I think, was held in November 2015, and you have one coming up as far as I'm for this year. So can you explain to us the situation in your own country and what has changed because of the pandemic? And you must unmute yourself at first. Sorry, I can't hear you.
Yeah,
Excellent.
I can hear only a cut off. So could you please me again? Yeah.
Okay. So forgive me. I hope we won't have any more technical problems. So I think there is an election coming up this year in Myanmar. So can you explain to us the situation in your country at the moment and what will change for this election because of the pandemic?
Yes. So this year is the critical year for our country of Myanmar. So well, for the time being, so the people are struggling during the global pandemic coronavirus crisis. And also the COVID-19 global pandemic since early 2020 has become a critical tax on the social cohesion in Myanmar. So a lot of hate speech and disinformation spreading on the social media. So also it causes the people lack of the trust, trust in the political trust. So, and almost half of the populations, about 20 million, have started using the social media. So mostly Facebook as their main source of news, popular media, and other forms of mass media, mass informations. So at that time, we started to find out that hate speech is spreading both online and offline in Myanmar. So particularly people use Facebook in negative way to spread the accusations and rumors by reposting old news and sharing misleading videos. So this can affect for our voters. There are 5 million of voters. 5 million of people in Myanmar are the first-time youth voters. So especially most of the Facebook users are mostly young people. So how could we encourage and motivate to counter hate speech and disinformation spreading on the social media? So this is a really challenging moment in Myanmar. So we are giving awareness to the voters to counter and how to fact check, how to spot the fake news on the social media. It's like consider the source. So check the author. So another one is check the date. So where the information's from. Check your bias, and we ask them to read beyond and supporting sources. And is it a jokes? So and ask the experts. So all these things are we are giving we are giving all these informations to among the young voters to get the accurate information about the electoral process and about the electoral news.
Can I just ask, because this I think was a problem even before COVID-19. So what has changed specifically because of the pandemic? What do you fear will happen in this election that might not have happened last year before Corona, before the virus?
Yeah, so I think people, the voters are still they are feeling that they are struggling to during the COVID-19 crisis, as well as we have the elections. So they are secure their health and security. So they are sometimes they might be worried. So why they are going to the police stations? Police stations are secure for their health, or do they have enough capacities for the voters to be able to vote in the polling stations safely? So something like that, or lots of questions and lots of confusions among the voters. So these are the challenges. But this is the pre-electoral, pre-election period, pre-elections period. So we have a lot of procedures, electoral procedures to during this period. So I think I hope we could handle. So we could handle the elections during the COVID-19 crisis period. So this is not only the responsible for the government, but also to coordinate with the voters and the electoral management bodies and the government. So we work together, collaborate together to to resist the to build our resilience for our critical moment of elections.
Thank you. Moving to you, Ttcat. First of all, could you explain that nickname? I'm curious.
I have a cat. Her name is Titi. She's been with me for 17 years so far. So that's how I get this nickname.
Okay. So one question to you. I think Taiwan just had elections in January. So you just, great timing, sort of avoided any turmoil or any massive influence of the virus. But in your sort of worst case scenario thinking, imagine the elections would be in, I don't know, 4 weeks or next week even. What threats do you see specifically because of COVID-19?
Yeah, so we had our presidential election on January 11th. And the first disinformation related to COVID-19, what we're seeing is actually the day before the voting day. There's a message spreading on the Facebook and also Line, which is a messenger app like WhatsApp, telling people that there's already confirming case in Taiwan by this unknown pneumonia virus from Wuhan. So people, if you want to go to vote, you should remember to wear the face mask. But it's just happened like one day, and by the time people are not really familiar about the coronavirus at all, so the voting rate is very, very high. We got around like 80% or 70-something% voting rates. Yeah, and also we had another election in local city just a few weeks ago about recall a Kaohsiung city mayor. And I think because Taiwan at the very first adopting this transparency and openness daily press conference from our central DC control, they publish every information to the public. So it really doesn't affect the election. But in the worst scenario, I can imagine that I just read in an article by last month. There's a study from Federal Reserve Bank of New York saying that there's a study indicate Spanish flu actually reshaped the German society and political system between 1918 to 1920. It showed that voting behavior has changed in cities and very, very high and often in favor for the Nazis. So I would say that the epidemic is actually the perfect soil that foster all kind of authoritarian regimes. And we see many our neighboring countries are deploying a lot of a surveillance system under the name of the combating epidemic. So that's something really a threat to the election and the democracy.
Mm-hmm. You have to send that study about the Spanish flu in Germany to me because I've never heard of it. It sounds really interesting. I've got to check. Luis, you're a journalist, but you had an earlier career, I think, as a firefighter. So alluding to that, when you look at the current situation in your, which one is the biggest regarding democracy? Which one would you put up first if you had the chance?
Yes, hello. For us, it's very important to have all the information and the facts, and there are not all the facts, not all the information to the public. So the public is creating a lot of hoaxes, stories around coronavirus. And at the beginning, they were very, very strict on the things related to the lockdown. And right now, when the curve is going higher, everyone wants to go out. So for the emergency medical services, it's very, very complicated situation because there are a lot of people in the streets, and of course they doesn't have a lot of equipment, a lot of resources. and there's not a lot of information. So people are doing many things that they shouldn't be doing right now.
Thank you, Luis. What do you think, not as a firefighter, but as a journalist, would be the best practical way to, if you had all the resources and all the means in the world, what way would you choose to tackle this problem, to put out that fire?
Okay, it's very complicated because it depends on each society. But for example, for us, it would be education, media literacy, and teach people how to spot and fight misinformation, because misinformation is going to be around every year, every time. So we have to learn how to spot, how to fight, how to counter misinformation, hate speech, and everything related to that, because that's the only way. Young people right now, even young people, they can spot some things that are fake, and they are beginning to do that on social media, but they're just small efforts. So we have to focus on education, and I think education is the basis of everything that we should do later on.
I think we get to that point later on. And Darko, it's good to have you. Actually, Bosnia-Herzegovina is just an hour and a half flight away from at least Berlin. So it seems very, very close, but you have problems different to that of other countries. If you could explain the situation in Bosnia-Herzegovina, what in your view is currently the biggest threat to strengthening Bosnia-Herzegovina is a democracy, but what's the biggest threat to strengthening this democracy even further, and has this changed because of the pandemic?
Well, I mean, we're going to see whether it's a democracy or not in November, because we have local elections that are, like at this moment, 50-50 chance of happening, because we currently have a proposal for the new budget or state budget, and it doesn't include the elections, even though by law they should be up in November. So basically, we'll see about the Bosnia being democracy by the end of the year. So basically, the pandemic has kind of emphasized and shown all the weaknesses that the country has, like the division, different measures in different parts of the country, different ways of accepting, like, blaming each other for the proliferation of cases. So, like, it's the usual Bosnian story, the pandemic way. That's what has been happening, and you can pretty much say that about the whole Balkans region. I mean, it's not different. Like, just thinking about the state of democracy in the whole region, we're going to have 3 elections in the region in the next month's time. So basically, in 3 days we have the elections in Serbia. Then in the next month we have Croatia and North Macedonia also up for elections, and then Bosnia and Montenegro probably until the end of the year. So I guess that the whole regional democracy is going to be tested until the end of the year. I mean, we might not be as proliferant in cases as other parts of the world during the pandemic, but in terms of everything else, like, the disinformation, the level of disinformation around it, the amount of theory of conspiracies, the like big geopolitical issues being settled through the region, through disinformation, all the way to what Ttcat has already mentioned, like this showing of authoritarian ways of government in the region. I think each and every government in the region has been using, like, more measures than necessary in order to kind of, like, let's say, even prepare for the upcoming elections. There are even, like, definite examples of different measures that are against human rights being used in order to gain some momentum for the elections or gain some advantage. So all of this we've seen both in Bosnia and the region. And Bosnia is probably going to see it more because the elections will be approaching, hopefully, if they even happen. So that in some cases even the pandemic might be used, and I'm guessing it's going to be used as an excuse for not holding the elections in Bosnia if they are not held in the end. So, like, the usual problems, just the pandemic way, probably emphasized a couple of times, and that's the story of the region. You have, like, on election lists of parties, you have people who were the biggest propagators of theories of conspiracy around like the pandemic, just because they are popular now in the region, and then all the parties are even fighting for these people to be on their list, because, you know, like now being a theory of conspiracy propagator is a popular thing here in the region. And then like all the way to boosting your, like, you know, public appearance with using measures that are against human rights, but then, like, you know, just kind of being populistic in a way that it adheres to some people. And, like, you know, this region not being affected that much by the pandemic was not because of the measures, was because of pure luck. We don't travel as much as the rest, and then, like, you know, the measures were introduced pretty early on, and that's the reason why actually in the end the region was pretty free of cases, not because the governments have done a marvelous job of stopping it. And we're gonna see now how it goes after the measures have been lifted a little bit. So we'll see.
Follow-up question: do you see a lot of Russian influence in the region at the moment?
Well, I mean, Russian influence has been there for a while, and it's pretty straightforward. I mean, not in a way that you would see like in the rest of the, probably in Central Europe or the countries in Central Europe that used to be like in the Warsaw Pact. But, like, you know, we see local propagators here that are very much in line with, like, you know, who needs direct Russian influence when you have, like, you know, political parties that are in government that are promoting Russian influence in the region. So, like, you know, it's a mixture of everything, and it's also even in looking into that, it's a very unique region compared to the rest, because we don't have only direct influence, we have local propagators, even governmental ones that are propagating that. So, you know, it's an open game here in the region very much.
So I think we've sort of covered a couple of the problems, and I think we could do that for hours and hours and days and weeks to follow. But let's look at, because you're all involved in actually tackling those problems, let's look at maybe possible solutions or best practices. Nemo, you're involved in trainings in civic education. So can you share a couple of success stories where you think you made a difference, your organization made a difference?
So now, as friends before the pandemic coronavirus crisis in Myanmar, so we plan to conduct the civic and voter education programs across the country. So especially this period is to be able to conduct the civic educations across the country, especially in the rural areas. So because one thing is in Myanmar, so the townships. Every township cannot access the internet, so that in-person civic education program is really effective, especially in the rural areas. So that our civil societies from our community, so they are planning to conduct civic educations in all these areas. So, but because of the government instructions and restrictions, traveling to one the state to another state and the region. So we change the civic education style. So we conduct the civic education through the Zoom. So, but this is also one of the challenge in Myanmar as well, because the technical issue, internet issue. So especially as you all know, they're in Brkan, so some townships cannot access the internet because of the internet breakdown or shutdown in some of the townships in Brkan. So the people, what do we do? The people in in Brkan state. So we were thinking that we selected the focal persons from the respective areas like Yangon, Mandalay, and the capital cities of the state and regions, and we conduct the civic education program on the Zoom. So at that time, a little bit we faced some challenges like technical issues and also the language issue. So, but for ethnic areas, so sometimes they can't understand very well about in Burma language. So we have the interpreters. So interpretations, the sessions also provided for those focal community members. So another one is, so like our civic education program is the inclusive civic education program. So not only for the young people, women. So we let them in, let women groups, marginalized groups, and LGBTQI people from the LGBTQI community and person with disability. So we arrange all these things and we conduct the civic educations right now. So hopefully it will affect to counter hate speech and disinformation, to assess the accurate informations for the electoral informations from the social media. So all these things. So hopefully they will get it. And after that, we are planning that the focal persons will share all these information throughout the country. So we are I think this is it will helpful for our country, the democratic transition period. So because 2020 election is really important for our country as well.
Thank you. And I see Ttcat nodding. So can you relate to what has just been, because Taiwan and Myanmar are totally different, obviously, but can you relate to some of the things said just now by Myanmar?
So of course, so these collectively action and activities by the civil society is always the best solution we have for all of us. And I think the people who hold down to the transparency, openness, democracy values should all come together. So Taiwan during the last election period, so which started from last year, we've been very highly aware that there's a Chinese information operation happening. So the disinformation, the propaganda campaign, or the cyber troops are the very hot topics during the whole election period, and that also extend to the epidemic period so far. So I would say that there's a lot of civil society organization do the fact checking or very quickly try to debunk suspicious operation on Facebook, and Facebook opened the war room during the election that also helped to downsize the spread of those disinformation by very, very quickly. And I think, yeah, those stuff are what we really leave us the room to fully doing more research on understand how's their mechanism and strategies and developing tools for respond to those challenges.
Do you think, because you follow the international discussions, political scene, media scene, and you're geographically quite close to China, do you think that US and European leaders / media are too soft on China at the moment? We're sort of with TikTok is in everybody's not really, and Huawei, yeah, there are a couple of discussions, but even when it comes to the disinformation about the outburst actually of COVID, in a couple of, I'd say, German outlets, there's been more talk of what happened in skiing resorts in Austria, and how the outbreak wasn't properly handled there. Then people talk about China, which is sort of the elephant in the room.
Yes, I would say yes. Maybe there's a lot of similarity narrative you already been heard of it. Give you some example, like people at the very, very first saying that this virus is nothing compared to US flu, H1N1 from the US, which already killed 6,600 people. But then nobody criticized US, they didn't lock down the city at all, but they criticized China. Why is that? Because of racism. That's come from China. And also another propaganda saying that the COVID-19 is actually brought by US Army to Wuhan military war game last November. So that's also very widespread and also translating to many, many different languages. Still happen today. So I see that the Western media well, I wouldn't say especially in American media actually pick up those topics quite often. But in Europe, I don't see that much about the people paying attention on those Chinese disinformation. And also that, the international fact-checking network, they opened up this COVID-19 allies to fact-checking all these COVID-19 related disinformation. And then there's only 2 organizations who understand Chinese and can verify those sources for the fact-checking initiative around the world, which one in Hong Kong, another one in Taiwan. So I would say that if we can contribute to the global communities or the partners here about that, if you need to verify or understand about the Chinese model, about this propaganda around the world. So that's where I think we can, as a Taiwanese, could contribute.
Thank you. And moving on to Darko, you're working on a digital toolkit, as I understand, to sort of further and promote democracy. Have you worked sort of COVID testing or vaccine into this toolkit, or was your biggest project regarding this work of yours?
Well, I mean, we are as I see much of the rest of the speakers, we are mostly dealing with disinformation and that's kind of promoting accountability. So basically fact-checking the politicians, fact-checking the media, that's where we are most prominent. And then we're trying to kind of establish these channels of communication of citizens with different institutions, different levels of government. So that's basically the flagships that we do, and most of our pandemic related work was, I mean, we just kind of moved half of our staff from everything else they've been doing to combating disinformation. That's how big the proliferation was during the pandemic. So we didn't freeze most of other work, but we kind of put it on minimum, and then mostly moved everybody to that portion of the work, because it was unprecedented so far in anything that we've seen before. I think that regionally between 7 newsrooms that are dealing with this information in this region, we've published I think 600 fact checks during 1.5 or 2 months during the peak of the pandemic, which is probably 3 or 4 times more than we would usually do in the same period. And at the same time, the increase in the number of readers of our outlets was some 800%, which is I mean, probably the similar increase on the disinformation side was seen at the same time. But I'm just saying that the levels of interest for the topic were not seen before. And at the same time, I think our biggest challenge in the whole thing probably is not the disinformation itself or the propagators. There are these two challenges that we have. One is the level of media literacy in the region, which was already kind of mentioned by pretty much everybody on the panel. But I would definitely emphasize the low level of involvement of tech companies in the whole process, and I think that needs to be improved. I mean, I know that some regions in the world have a much better commitment and much better processes in terms of combating disinformation, supported by the tech companies, whereas the Balkans region is totally left alone. We've suffered probably, I think I didn't count, but 6 or 7 closures of our accounts during the pandemic by the tech companies, just because they were thinking we are the ones spreading this information rather than fighting it. So we had more issues ourselves fighting this information than the ones spreading it. In terms of how the tech companies treated us. So I would definitely emphasize that as a challenge that we need to overcome quickly, and also as a big opportunity, because I think that with smaller efforts at this level, by a good involvement in the region, the tech companies could definitely reach things here and solve a lot of problems.
Just one quick question. Does when you talk about the tech companies, do Twitter, Facebook, and Google, do they actually have representatives in your country that don't just cover ad services, but also sort of stuff like information or policy? Do you have somebody? Is there somebody you can talk to?
Yeah, well, I mean, we as a part of the international fact-checking network and all the global connections that we have, we do have some communication with tech companies, but the problem is that actually so far outside of Croatia, which is the EU member, and that's why they have committed to Croatia. Outside of Croatia, no other country has had even like a third-party fact-checking status from Facebook. There's not a single organization. We've been doing, for instance, fact-checking in Bosnia for more than 10 years, and we still don't have even the third-party status from Facebook, let alone anything else. So, like, you know, it is an issue in all sorts, and we need to definitely, I think that this needs to be addressed, and because, you know, the Balkans region might not be big in terms of numbers or not a big market, but in terms of the geopolitical position and like the level of influence of different global players, and you know, obviously the level of disinformation that's being served here, it is very crucial and urgent for them to start paying attention to the region much more.
Exactly, and I think we can still remember the war, which was actually the last one we had in Europe.
Yeah, and the repercussions of that still last. I mean, I would say that the region is probably more of a ceasefire than peace at the moment. Like, you know, yeah.
So talking about the tech companies, I was trying to sort of shift that to a later part of our conversation, but bringing both tech companies and the US president into the discussion. So you probably all noticed the tweet Donald Trump posted a couple of days ago, actually weeks, and he wrote, "There's no way that mail-in ballots will be anything less than substantially fraudulent. Mailboxes will be robbed, ballots will be forged, etc." So this is obviously not true in the US, and I'd say it's obviously true in Germany and many other countries in the world. Moving on to Luis, would you say that postal ballots, I'm just trying to keep it a little practical here, postal ballots in a pandemic could be an option for you? That's something that is already done. Would you consider it straight away? Would Donald Trump calling it fraudulent be right, but I don't know, you would be parts of it? Or would that be in case of nobody able to leave the house or the flat? Would that be a chance to have an election instead of postponing it?
Sorry, I couldn't hear all the question because it was like cutting. Can you repeat, please?
Yes, sorry. I hope it's not my Wi-Fi. Being in Germany, the net quality here is definitely not what it should be in an industrialized country. Question is, do you think postal ballots in the case of pandemic could be an alternative, could be the solution if people weren't allowed to leave their houses or their flats? Mailing the vote and not sending it a post and not going to an election office or a ballot.
Okay, it's I couldn't hear, but I can say something about it. Right now, all the information and the misinformation about coronavirus is weaponized against the government, because I have to say this is a part of the context. For the last government, they have like a lot of agencies and a lot of what we call net centers. If you don't know what is a net center, it's an organization, an agency that offers a service that you can pay, and they have like a decks of troll farms, troll factories, and everything around that to spread misinformation, do character assassination, and all that kind of tactics. And they were working with the past government, and when the new government that took office in the middle of January, they came with a lot of different teams. So they are right now attacking the actual government. So this is going to be weaponized for many months, I think, and it's going to affect the next elections. For example, right now we have for the Supreme Court Justice elections this year, and it's like very difficult because all the media is focusing on coronavirus and everything is related to that. And no one is watching or fact-checking or whatever related to that elections that are not public elections because they are made by some members of universities, the public universities, and lawyers and everything about that. So they are like doing a lot of things without the media viewing that, or at least trying to report on that. Of course, there are reports. Of course, there is a lot of pieces and articles about that, but not the focus right now is coronavirus and the lack of information from the government. So there are a lot of people, possibly they will be candidates for the next elections that will weaponize everything that is happening right now. And because we have a lot of agencies, we have a lot of net centers right now, it's gonna be like an information war, and people are in the middle. They don't know what to expect, what to believe, and this pollution, this information pollution that we have right now is very, very complicated to fight. So it's gonna be very difficult. Even the next, our next elections, general elections, is going to be 2.5 years from now. So I think it's going to be very hard for us.
I think we have technical audio problems. So forget my questions. It was really, really interesting what you said. I'd like to pose one to Darko and Ttcat, because you are in sort of developing online digital engineering, etc. If you met Mark Zuckerberg and Sundar Pichai from Facebook and Google, and they granted you one wish, what would it be? What would you wish for?
Okay. I believe that they have the power not to interfere the information that is flowing in many directions, but they have the power at least to let academic members to study. They are doing some efforts, but not enough. For example, here in Guatemala, we are, like Dark said, doesn't even exist for them. They doesn't have offices here. They doesn't have any member here. They doesn't believe they should have any efforts here. But if I have the opportunity, I will ask to create a space where journalists and academic members should be allowed to be part of like a board that could not censor, but could guide some regulations around the platform. Not only Facebook, but maybe all the platforms.
Ttcat, what about you? What wish would you?
It's a separate wish for Google and Facebook,
okay,
or just one wish?
No, it's fine, because it's so different.
All right, so for Google, I think Google need a Google version Cambridge Analytica scandal for them to fully realize what's the problem on their own kind of a platform, like a Google search and also YouTube and also Google mobile phone. So as all of you know that on the desktop, on your computer, on your browser, you can add a lot of a plugin for warning you to give you a lot of features, or warning you the website you are watching right now is actually content farm or a misinformation, and alert by the third-party fact-checking initiative, right? But all these plugin is not allowed in both Apple phone or Android mobile phone. They just feel like they are not in this game at all, especially Apple. Apple don't allow any kind of plugin or third-party script for the Safari browser on the cell phone, right? So I would say that to those tech company, look at your cell phone mobile app and try to improve that and work with third-party fact-checking initiative or other organization, and try, because more and more people actually read those information from the mobile. app or on a mobile device. And that's something we should really pay attention to it. That's my wish.
A very profound one. Darko, moving to you. What's your wish?
Yeah, well, I mean, I could probably write up a 100-page strategy of like what I would like to see, but like let me try to be very brief and like, you know, if I would have only one thing to say in like 10 seconds, I would say probably something like, for every cent you earn from this information, spend 1 cent to fight it. And that's pretty much it, like, you know, because the amounts they are earning on spreading this information are huge. And I think that's kind of like, you know, what's at the same time stopping the fight for this information. So if these things would be equal, I would be more than satisfied.
Thank you. Nanmo, there was an article in the New York Times in 2018. I think the headline read, what if your country is Tinderbox and Facebook is the match? You know, Tinderbox go up and fire very, very quickly. So the examples mentioned there were Sri Lanka, Indonesia, Mexico, but also Myanmar, when false rumors posted on social media, not just Facebook, called violence, sometimes even lynchings. That was written 2 years ago, and at the time you mentioned that you do a lot of language, well, not education, but you need interpreters in your own country to talk to everyone. Facebook doesn't even have enough people speaking your language. So how should they monitor what is happening? And you say within the last 2 years things have improved regarding the social media platforms, or is it just the same as it used to be?
Yeah. So you know, in Myanmar, so like after 2015 and now until now, so 2020, so a lot of Facebook users are especially the young people. So like I think yeah. So the Facebook teams should have the proper the procedures of how to fact check and how to counter for the disinformation and hate speech spreading on the social media things. Yeah.
So I remember Facebook in the US started a sort of fact checkers alert, disputed content. And what actually happened, and I think it says a lot about humanity, is that posts with this tag, with this disputed tag, were shared even more because some people just like to do what they shouldn't, and so it actually had an opposite effect. So I think it's extremely difficult to find the one solution, and there may be a need for a zillion solutions, but that's not what those platforms are made for. Quite practically, a question to all of you, because we're trying in our election committee, we're trying to figure out whether the ballot itself is more vulnerable or the personal choice to go and vote. So in a pandemic, do you think that in a specific precinct, in a specific constituency, a social media rumor could keep people from turning up at the ballot and actually voting? Do you think that is possible, and do you think this could have a massive impact on an election in your country, let it be local or let it be general?
Yes. Yeah, it's a massive influence for the voters. So particularly people use Facebook in a negative way to spread accusations and rumors by reposting old news and then sharing misleading videos, especially during the electoral period. So hate speech mostly emerge in the comments sections and post. So about the conflict-related news, IDPs or the refugee news, and the migrant workers who came across from the borders area. So during the the COVID-19 crisis. So lost thousands of the migrant workers from the border areas came to our country. So this is for our country. This is a good opportunities to get them to vote in the elections. So one thing is one thing is a hate speech and disinformation spreading on those particular targeted groups. So it causes the voting. It causes the lack of accurate information. Can harm for the electoral for the election. So especially for example in our country, so if their names are not in the voter list, so they cannot get a chance to vote in the election. So it is important to encourage and motivate them to check their names on the voter list. Also, electoral management bodies needs the support of various institutions, institutions to to stop the hate speech and disinformation in the interest of protecting fundamental human rights. So I think, yeah.
Floor is open. Do you think rumors could immediately impact elections by people not turning up after being misinformed online?
Yeah, I can like just kind of have a thought or two on that. I mean, I think that definitely it changes the political landscape. I mean, and not only for elections, and it changes it in general. And I think that like the pandemic was kind of a sobering place for all of us to realize that. And I think that each following election is going to be more and more influenced with what's happening on the social media, and whether it's going to be the turnout or not turning out, that depends on how the situation develops and what the strategies are. We I think had the first here in Serbia, I mean not here but in the region in Serbia, I think we had the first rally on a Zoom platform, pre-election rally in the world so far. So things are rapidly changing. I mean, it was a PR stunt obviously, but it did happen with a politician going out in front of hundreds of screens of people watching him. So the whole landscape is changing, and the whole infrastructure of how we do politics is changing. So how much it's going to influence elections, and how much it's going to be crucial for the way they are implemented or the results of them, it remains to be seen. But I think that definitely each and every next election is not going to be the same as the ones that we are used to before.
I think because we only have about 20 minutes to go, we should open the questions to the audience. And you've seen me sort of sneakily glance away, so I've got the questions on my phone, and I'd like to start with one for I think Ttcat, asked by Professor Shastra. What strategy would you like to suggest Asian civil societies and democratic groups to adopt to weaken a growing attraction for the undemocratic model republic by China? Represented by China, I think this abbreviation, but you got the gist of it.
Well, I think lots of civil society organization in the region especially, or bureau initiative countries, are aware that the Chinese influence is getting stronger and stronger. And but how to approach and how to understand that, it depends on, it's kind of difficult because there's a language barrier, there's a culture difference that fully understand how the China's government operating their administrations and all kind of different branch, it's a mess. So I would say that, and also there's a risk. So some topic is much more dangerous than combating propaganda online, I would say. So I would say that I would suggest that the scale of this battle actually requires a global civil society cooperation to push back. So for the people who fund the Chinese or like Hong Kong or Taiwanese organizations to work with, or the overseas Chinese organization that to start with to understand and assess those risks and influence in their country and think about more collectively way to debunk those propaganda. And I would say that this is actually a war of not only narrative and the truth, but also the governance model. So democracy versus the authoritarian. With this epidemic, they are claiming their model is much more stronger than combating the COVID-19 or such things. And we need to show the world and the more general public about there's a alternative way, that democratic way, that we don't have to do that, but we can also contain the situation. Yeah.
Thank you. Here's another one by Pearl Matibe. I guess to all of you, but whoever has the best idea, just go first. So the question reads, do you have 3 strategies and tactics that you could share for independent journalists as steps or as apps to use to fact check an autocratic regime institutions where access to information is extremely difficult? Who has the best tactics or strategies to tackle disinformation against an autocratic regime, or in an autocratic regime where information is extremely difficult? Not everyone at the same time. Luis, we haven't heard from you.
Okay. For the last years, I've been doing open source intelligence. So maybe independent journalists wish to learn about OSINT. It has a lot of resources. It gives a lot of tools that let information flow to the journalist or even the newspaper or the media. So they can track, investigate, localize, and gather information and then analyze it, and they can also visualize. So maybe that's the point that they should go to open source intelligence.
Anyone wants to share?
Yeah, I mean, this is like, you know, from being from a region that's kind of like, you know, always being told what to do, like, you know, from different people. I don't feel comfortable saying to people like what they should do. I think it's all about the local context and particularities of a certain situation. So, like, you know, in my opinion, I think that in these cases, the best thing you can do is try to raise your profile, try to kind of like, you know, create a safety net first, and then, like, you know, once people are aware of you, what you're doing, your existence, and, like, you know, generally once you raise the price of yourself, then it's easier to work even in oppressive regimes. I mean, that's at least my opinion, but, like, you know, I usually hesitate giving any advices to anybody else in elsewhere, because, like, you know, I think it's all about the local context in most cases.
I absolutely agree with you. On the other hand, if people seek advice and they can decide for themselves whether your advice or strategies or tactics will help them in their local context, and I think it's actually quite an interesting forum we have, because it's so diverse, and all our countries are so very, very specific and difficult, but I think there's some problems we have in common. And I think there may be some solutions we may have in common as well. Ttcat, do you have, we have 2 strategies so far. Do you have a third one?
Well, I wouldn't call it a solution, but I would like to share what we do here. So first thing is we are trying to build a monitoring database for message across platforms. So from Chinese media environment to Taiwanese Facebook, YouTube, or any other platforms. And because those messages right now brigading from each platform to another platform, sometimes they translate to another language. It's really, really difficult, but I think if we do have open source, open database for people to better understand the message you are reading actually is not originate in your own society, then you should be aware who is propagating those message and in what kind of a purpose, right? So that's something we do. But another thing I want to emphasize here is that I don't see much people try to study that why people believe such narrative and disinformation from a human perspective or psychology perspective. How we build a counter narrative and how we better communicate with those receiver or what we say victim of the disinformation. What's their motivation? What's their emotion behind why they want to believe such narrative? Probably because they feel they unheard or they have such unsatisfied. They want to be those narrative actually serve what they believe. So I would say that from this like a society engagement, social engagement part is what the civil society work and meant to be. So that's something we should really, really enhance.
Thank you very much, Ttcat, for that really, really precise point. And although I'm just the moderator, I'd just like to emphasize what you've said, because I often feel that in particular news media and journalists who often have a not very diverse background tend to look down upon people who don't have the same either mindset or the same level of information, and to belittle them. And I feel that that's something my country, which doesn't have a problem with election fraud mostly overall, but what we see here too, that people don't feel engaged and don't feel addressed by mass media and by some news media if they aren't talked to sort of on eye level. And whenever we journalists put ourselves on a pedestal and sort of raise our fingers and try and tell people what they should think, they react quite allergic against that. And I think that's something for our whole profession to really adopt, that if we want to reach people, we should talk in their language and not try to prove that we're better informed, which we often are. But people don't want to be told they're dumb hillbillies, because then they certainly won't listen. So there are two questions which sort of relate to each other. I'll start with the first one and I'll read them out so you have a lot of time to think. So question from Andrew Barden: what are some of the trade-offs we must address between being an anti-censorship society while also fighting misinformation? And this relates to Bjarke Nissen-Lykke, who asks, who will decide what information is disinformation, hate speech, etc.? Institutions and mechanisms for suppression of these kinds of speech are ripe for capture by authoritarian elements that can use it to suppress other kind of speech. So what is the panel's solution to this problem? Who wants to go first?
I can address that one. I mean, first of all, I totally believe in freedom of speech, and I don't think that, like, censorship should be a way to fight anything ever. Like, I think that, but I think that the game is not fair. I think we should definitely work on making the game more fair, and that's not censorship. That's more like, what I already said. Like, if a social tech company would basically, like, spend as much money on fighting this information as they are earning from it, then, like, that would be making the game more fair. But on the other hand, I believe that, like, there shouldn't be an authority on, like, deciding what's true, what's not. Like, I think that's something that's like the common public way of understanding. Like, journalism, on its side has always been fighting for truth and fighting for proper reporting on things, and I think that should stay the same no matter what the source or what the channel for spreading information is. Like, we should be fighting for the truth. And I think that, like, by doing it properly, by going to the sources, by checking everything, by being, like, critical about the information that we are getting, I think that should be the right judge, and that should be the strategy. Of course, in some ways, like, there should be institutional involvement by governments and societies in fighting this information, and, like, that should be definitely on the media literacy side, on enabling people to understand the the information and the way that it's spread, like, you know, on different fields. I think that should even the play field, but like, you know, straight up censorship or any form of it is not in my playbook at all. Like, you know, I don't trust in it at all.
Anybody else? Yes, Luis.
Okay. I have to tell, it's very different. I believe in freedom of speech. Sorry. I believe in freedom of speech, but I think we have to divide what people are saying and the tactics they are using to amplify what they are saying. So I focus mostly on the tactics and the strategies they are using to amplify, to harass, and everything. It's not the content of the message, because if we focus on the content of the message, that is censorship. But if you focus on what they are doing, if they are having decks of bots amplifying unauthentic behavior, doing doxing with private information, and they are using a lot of tactics. Those tactics have to be regulated, and that's my point. We doesn't have to focus on the message by itself. People has the right to say anything what they want, even if it's a lie. But if they are paying a lot of trolls, a lot of agencies to amplify that message, doing harassment to another person, that I think it has to be regulated. So we can focus our regulation on the tactics and what the actions that people are doing and the behavior they are showing in the platforms.
Thank you, Luis. Here's a question actually to me. I'll keep that very short. Are the EU countries adequately protected against disinformation, whether state-backed or not? If not, what provisions can be made by actors to combat disinformation? How can we look to other countries from around the world for lessons learned? Quite frankly, I don't think the EU is adequately protected against disinformation, and the funding by, let's look at Brussels, to tackle disinformation is definitely not what it should be. So I think whenever there's a discussion about how to, and that relates to what Darko said, do we tax the big tech companies properly within the EU? I think we should also always look at do we ourselves spend enough resources, time, and effort to do our job? And coming to I think one more question. We have time to, no, I mixed these up. On a more positive note, coming to the end, during the current Black Lives Matter movement in the US, we've seen people align for a greater cause in spite of, or perhaps exacerbated by, the current pandemic. How can we inspire the fight for democracy in a similar way? Okay, that's not an easy one. Nanmo, you've seen the pictures and videos of protesters on the street despite a pandemic, because the cause was so much theirs and it was so emotional. Is that something to learn from?
Like a freedom of freedom of speech is really its freedom of speech is really is leading for the democratic society. So like our disinformations and hate speech and disinformation spreading among the societies. At other times, all the people from the societies needs to respond, combat all these like this. Yeah.
So thank you. I know this has been difficult because, again, different time zones, very different countries, very different backgrounds, as we've stressed. But I, for myself, have learned a lot from you. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for being on this panel. Thanks to the audience. I don't know the numbers yet, but I'm sure we'll be told. I've been asked to relate another message by our organizers. We would be very, very grateful if everyone was able to tune in again tomorrow, since tomorrow we will welcome keynotes by Taiwan's President Ching Ing-wen. Ttcat, was that approximately right? Okay.
What?
Thank you. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, as well as his predecessors Madeleine Albright and John Kerry, plus Microsoft's President Brad Smith, plus Vera Jourova, the Vice President of the EU Commission. They'll all be in tomorrow, so tune in. Thank you so much for your time. Good luck with everything you're doing. I'm very impressed by what I've heard, and I hope we keep in touch. Have a good day or night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Darko, nice to meet you.